Hello, third graders. I hope you're having a fantastic Thursday. We are still learning about the ancient Roman civilization, and today we're learning about the Roman Republic. What is a republic, you ask? Well, we are about to find out. Some vocabulary words that you will hear throughout the lesson. Attributes. Characteristics that someone or something has, qualities, traits, features. Consuls is a noun, is a thing. 2 Roman government officials that were elected every year by the Senate to act as leaders of the government, with authority to choose whether new laws should pass, whether Rome should go to war, and things like that, etc. Elite is a noun. It's a group of people. An exclusive upper class group, a class of people considered to be the richest, most educated, and are most influential. They're the rich people, the elite. Lowly, the humble poor, not powerful, lowly. It's an adjective, so it describes someone. So if you're humble and poor, you're lowly. Rivalries. Maybe you have a sibling rivalry between your brother or sister. Oppositions or conflict between individuals or groups that compete with each other. Surplus. An extra amount of something that is needed. A bounty. So what have we learned so far? We've talked about mythology, right? In the last lesson, we talked about mythology. That's the Romans and their gods and goddesses. We talked about the Greeks and how they were similar to the Romans' gods and goddesses. What is a civilization? Right? A civilization is a group of people that have like a religion, they have leaders, they have jobs, and they work together as a community. A civilization. You live in a civilization. A civilization has a government, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is the Roman government, because it's actually going to change a few times. And at some point, it might look a little bit like our government. So today you're going to hear about the citizens of the Roman Republic. What does it mean to be a citizen? Well, you are a citizen of the United States because you were born here. If you were born in a different country and you come to the United States, you can become a citizen by studying and taking a test and making an oath. So a citizen is a person who belongs to a country. They pay taxes, they can vote. All right, so they're citizens of Rome, are Romans. Someone is born in another country and wants to become a citizen. Well, we just talked about it, right? They have to be here for 5 years. They have to obey the laws. They have to know things about the United States. They have to know facts about the United States history, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. They have to understand how the government works and take a test. And they have a ceremony. I have friends that have done this, and it's so exciting when they actually become citizens and can vote and say that they're citizens of the United States. You're also going to hear about the slaves of ancient Rome in today's Read Aloud. A slave is a person who is unjustly considered the property of another person. Slaves have to do hard work for no pay. They do not have the same rights that other citizens have, such as the right to vote. So we've talked about the legend of Romulus and Remus. In that legend, which tells us how Rome came to be, or how people believed Rome came to be, you heard about 2 Roman gods, Mars and Tiberius. According to Roman mythology, Mars is the god of war and Tiberius is the god of the Tiber River. What's the difference between a myth and a legend again? Well, a legend usually involves real events or real people in history, such as Romulus and Remus, but that the story about them is often exaggerated, so it's made bigger than it actually is. And all or parts of it cannot be proven to be absolutely true. There's no evidence. Whereas in mythology, it's the collection of myths or stories. It's associated with the beliefs of a particular group of people, and it explains why people act a certain way, how things came to be, or how things happen in nature. Before the establishment of the Roman Republic, areas in present-day Italy and surrounding lands were divided up into lots of little kingdoms with many different rulers. Some kings were richer and more powerful than others. The kings and their people fought each other all the time, and over the years they developed long-lasting rivalries that often resulted in warfare. The city of Rome was controlled by a long line of Etruscan kings who had ruled for several generations. Etruscan kings worried above all else about losing power, especially losing control of their city. They figured the best way to hang on to power was to be as harsh as possible with their subjects, the people over whom they ruled. Aren't you glad that your teacher doesn't think that that's the way to control a classroom? Around 500 BC, remember BC means before Christ, the people living in Rome decided they had enough. They overthrew their Etruscan king and created a new form of government. Rome's new form of government was now called a republic. In some very important ways, this new government was based on a form of government that the ancient Greeks practiced at the time, democracy. Instead of having a king make all the laws and tell everyone else what to do, the Romans decided that the citizens, the people, should be able to elect those who would work together to make decisions and form laws to guide how their society was ruled. In this new form of government, the people had more of a voice in how their society would be ruled as a republic. Right? When there was a king, the king said something and that's how it was. Whereas the republic, people had a voice. They could say what they wanted. So in a republic, instead of having one person in charge like a king or queen holding all the power, the citizens elect, they have an election, they pick many people to speak for them and make decisions. The word public means the people. Does this type of government sound familiar? Here's how the new form of government worked. Instead of a king, there was a group of people called the Senate. Well, that sounds familiar. Members of the Senate were called senators. There were 300 senators in the Roman Senate, all of whom were men. Senators held their position for as long as they lived. The people elected 2 consuls, 2 people whose job it was to make final decisions on whether a new law should be passed or whether, for instance, to go to war. They had the power to command the army and were advised by the Senate. The consuls were powerful people in the Roman Republic, but they did not have the power to write new laws on their own. There's an illustration of some of them in their togas. Senators debated over what kinds of laws were needed in Rome. When the senators came to an agreement, they would advise the consuls on their decision. If one consul made a decision that the other consul did not approve of, he could say veto, which is Latin for I forbid. Even those consuls had the attributes of being very important and powerful. The 2 consuls had to work together to create a process of checks and balances, or a way to balance out each other's decision. These ideas of the veto and checks and balances are 2 practices from ancient Rome that are part of the American government and other governments around the world today. So remember checks and balances, and we can add it to our contributions chart at the end of the day. Not all citizens of Rome were treated equally. In fact, some people living in Rome were not citizens at all. People of Rome were divided into groups, each with different rights and privileges under the law. The smallest and most powerful group was called the Patricians. Patricians were Rome's elite. Right? They're the rich people. A small group of wealthy, powerful people who owned large homes in the city, vineyards in the country, and villas on the coast. How fancy. The patricians were citizens of Rome, meaning they had the right to vote and they had certain protections and privileges under the law. Because they were the most educated and privileged group, the patricians were also the ones most likely to become senators. So they got to make a lot of the laws in the Roman Republic. As you might guess, the people in this painting are wealthy Roman patricians. In contrast to the ancient Greek culture, a woman in ancient Rome Women in ancient Rome were considered citizens, and wealthy women were part of the elite patrician group, although they could not vote or serve as senators or consul. Not fair, huh? Another group of Roman citizens were called plebeians. Plebeians were second-class citizens, meaning that they did not have all the rights and privileges enjoyed by patricians. However, the plebeians had one big advantage: numbers. Because the plebeians made up the largest portion of Roman citizenry by far, the wealthy patricians learned that they needed to make sure the plebeians were happy, or at least happy enough that they wouldn't rise up to try to take more power for themselves. Like patricians, plebeians were citizens, so they could vote. However, they were subject to a different set of laws than patricians. For instance, a patrician could freely insult and even attack a plebeian, but a plebeian would be in big trouble if he did the same to a patrician. So you can see in this illustration, who do you think are the patricians and who do you think are the plebeians? The word lowly means humble or low in wealth and status. So who do you think was lowly, the plebeians or the patricians? Plebeians could own property, but it was hard for them to gain enough land or money to become as rich or as powerful as the patricians. Plebeians came in all shapes and sizes, including fairly wealthy shopkeepers and traders, hardworking farmers and fishermen, and other poor and lowly workers. Farmers were important because plentiful crops were very necessary for the success of Rome's culture and civilization. That is one of the main reasons why Romans worshipped Saturn, the god of the harvest. Farms were important. When farmers are successful and have a great harvest, they have more food than they really need to just feed their family. This is called a surplus. Roman farmers with a surplus of food could share their bountiful supply or sell it to other people at the marketplace. Those people in turn didn't have to work as hard to feed themselves. Instead, they could turn their attention to other things like making pottery, blacksmithing, or weaving cloth. Some Romans worked on making elaborate sculptures and mosaics. When they had a surplus of harvested crops, ancient Romans also had a surplus of time to honor their gods, which they spent by building temples, going to festivals like Saturnalia, and participating in rituals. We have used the words surplus and bountiful to talk about crops, but can you use these words anytime you have much more of something that is needed? Yes, you can. Do you remember, what does elaborate mean? Right? They made elaborate temples and things. It means like lots of details and like extra fancy, very elaborate. Many Romans who didn't farm were traders and merchants. They could sell goods that came from ships from all over the known world. Remember, Italy is a peninsula in the Mediterranean Sea. These goods would be sold in markets located in large open gathering places called forums. In these forums, people could shop, listen to debates, and worship in temples. The biggest forum was in the heart of Rome and was therefore called the Roman Forum, or just the Forum. The Senate had an important building in the Forum where the senators and consuls met to debate and discuss issues. The Forum was a very important place in Roman society, serving as serving as a gathering place of culture, economy, politics, religion, and much more. The ruins of the Forum today attract many tourists each year. So these are actual photographs of the ruins of where there used to be a forum in Rome. What are two natural waterways into and out of the Mediterranean Sea? Well, there's the Strait of Gibraltar and the Bosporus Strait. These images show the ruins of Roman forums as they are today. The forum on the left is the Roman Forum. Imagine these large areas filled with many people milling about. So here's the straits. We have the Strait of Gibraltar, and then we have we have, what was it called? The Bosporus Strait right here. So a strait is a almost like a river water that connects one body of water to another. So this one connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Black Sea. This one connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea. Another group of people who lived in Rome were the slaves. Slaves were not considered citizens of Rome, so they could not vote. Slaves belonged to their owners, so they did not have the freedom to do as they pleased. Slaves could not choose where to live or work. They had no choice in what job they got to do, and they were not allowed to quit the jobs their owners gave them. Roman slaves did have some rights. For instance, Roman slaves were allowed to receive as much education as they needed to be better at whatever job they had. After some time, if slaves worked very hard for their owner, they could earn their freedom. Once slaves were given their freedom, their children were considered full citizens of Rome. You may be wondering where these slaves came from. As Rome expanded into new territories, the Romans fought wars with the people already living in those areas. It was common for the people on the losing side of a war to become slaves for the winning side when the war was over. Slaves were considered the property of their owners. They had to obey their owners and do difficult work for no pay. They were also not allowed to insult or attack a Roman citizen, or there would be consequences. What kind of consequences do you think? But some of them were put to death. Slaves were considered the most lowly people in Roman society, at the other end of the spectrum from the elite class. Whether patricians, plebeians, or slave, man, woman, or child, all of the people of ancient Rome contributed in their own way to the many components of this ancient civilization. So they all worked and lived together. You heard in this read aloud that Rome became a republic. What is a republic? It's a form of government that allows the people, the public, who are citizens, to vote and elect leaders instead of having one ruler decide everything. Before Rome became a republic, what type of government was in place? There are many different kingdoms, monarchies, each ruled by different Etruscan kings who were very cruel. Excuse me. What was the relationship like between those kingdoms? Did they get along? No, they fought and had long-standing rivalries with one another. What happened that caused Rome to change into a republic? The people of Rome became tired of the harsh kings and overthrew them. They set up a new government. Down with the king. They defied the king, right? That was one of our other words, defied. You heard about 3 main groups of people in Rome. Tell me the name of a group and share 2 or 3 facts about that group. Patricians were wealthy citizens. The elite served as senators, had slaves, could vote. Plebeians were second-class citizens, might be lowly in career or status, could vote, worked as farmers, traders, and merchants. While slaves, some received just enough education to help them be better at their jobs. They could not vote, they were not citizens, and had few rights. How many consuls were there, and who elected them? 2, and the people. They elected them, like we elect our leaders. How did the consuls balance out each other's decisions? Through checks and balances and veto power. One of them could say, I veto that. We're not doing that. There were 300 senators. What was their role? What did the senators do? They debated laws and they advised the consuls. What is it called when farmers have more food than necessary for their families? A surplus. What is a synonym for this word? Remember, synonym means it's another word that means the same thing as surplus. Bounty or bountiful. When Romans did not have to farm, what other types of things could they do? They made pottery, they would weave cloth, they were a blacksmith, and they would create sculptures and mosaics. What do you see in these images? Name some of the activities and types of people in the ancient Roman forums. The forums were large, open, busy spaces for markets, temples, businesses, statues, parades, debates, etc. That means and more. People of all types would go to the forum for a variety of reasons, such as shopping, teaching, entertainment, etc. Would you rather live in a republic where citizens vote and elect their leaders, or in a place where only one person makes all of the decisions? Why? It's an interesting question. Our word for the day that you heard in the read aloud, you heard that the consuls have the attributes of being very important and powerful. Say the word attributes with me. Attributes. Attributes are characteristics, features, or traits that someone or something has. Attributes are sometimes described as positive attributes or negative attributes. Bravery was one of the many great attributes that Lewis, Clark, and Sacagawea possessed when traveling to the West through dangerous and unknown lands. What are some of your attributes that you could use to describe yourself or someone you know? So these are attributes could be described as character traits. What are you like? How would people describe you? All right, good job, guys. I hope you enjoyed learning about the Roman Republic.